It was supposed to be the silence, that specific, heavy, beautiful silence that only exists when you finally step onto your own driveway after 6 months of turbine engines and shouting commands over the roar of the ocean. The kind of silence where the only thing you hear is the wind in the trees and the distant hum of a lawnmower. But instead, what I got that Tuesday morning, standing there with my deployment bag still digging into my shoulder and a travel mug of stale coffee in my hand, was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of high heels on concrete, a sound that I would soon learn was the drumbeat of a war I didn't even know I had been drafted into. I watched, genuinely confused, as a woman I'd never met marched up to my driveway. And I use the word marched deliberately because she moved with the terrifying, unearned confidence of a 4-star general inspecting the front lines, stopped directly in front of my pride and joy, my decommissioned 25-foot Navy patrol boat, and slapped a neon orange sticker right onto the gray hull of federal military property like she was tagging a rusted-out sedan in a junkyard. This was Linda Sterling, the self-appointed queen of Oakwood Haven, a woman who treated our suburban cul-de-sac not as a neighborhood, but as her personal fiefdom, where grass height was measured in millimeters and joy was a code violation. Though at that specific moment, all I saw was a stranger in a beige pantsuit violating federal law. "This commercial monstrosity has to be gone by Friday," she said, not even looking me in the eye, her voice possessing that nasal, grating quality of someone who has never been told no in her entire adult life. Section 4. Paragraph B of the community bylaws clearly states no commercial vehicles. Pay the $500 fine or I call the tow truck. I just stared at her, the steam from my coffee curling into the cold morning air, trying to process the sheer absurdity of it. Because what Linda didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly understand in her narrow little world of power trips and clipboard tyranny, was that she hadn't just ticketed a boat. She had technically just defaced a registered asset of the United States Navy. "Ma'am," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep, "that's not a commercial vehicle. I'm Commander Alex Mercer, and that vessel is a piece of military history I'm restoring. It's federal property." She finally looked at me then, dead in the eye, and delivered the line that would eventually seal her fate, a line so dripping with arrogance it almost commanded respect. "Military people aren't special, Mr. Mercer. Your little boat is an eyesore, and the rules apply to everyone, even you." Let me back up a second so you understand the stakes here, because to understand why I was willing to go to the mat over this, you have to understand that Oakwood Haven was supposed to be my sanctuary, the place I chose to rebuild my life after my divorce, a place where my teenage daughter, Sophie, and I could spend weekends sanding down the hull of that boat. A vessel that was identical to the one my grandfather skippered in the Pacific. It wasn't just fiberglass and diesel engines. It was the only thing keeping me grounded when the rest of my life felt like it was drifting out to sea. The neighborhood was populated by good people, like Sergeant Major Red Hank Miller, a gravel-voiced Marine who lived 3 doors down and understood the code we lived by, and Elena Rodriguez, a sharp-witted forensic paralegal across the street who was raising 2 kids on her own. Normal people just trying to live their lives until Linda Sterling decided that being president of the Homeowners Association was her destiny. She had run unopposed, of course, because who actually wants that job? But within 6 months, she had turned the association into a surveillance state, carrying a literal tape measure to check fence heights, timing how long garbage cans sat on the curb, and terrorizing anyone who dared to leave a garden hose uncoiled. But her fatal flaw, the crack in her armor, was selective enforcement. Hank's RV sat in his driveway for weeks without a peep. The folks on the corner left Christmas lights up until March. But if you crossed Linda, if you questioned her authority, suddenly you were hit with fines for weeds that didn't exist and paint colors that were too aggressive. And apparently, by existing, I had crossed her. I didn't argue with her that morning. I just watched her strut away, clutching her clipboard like a weapon, and then I walked inside, sat down at my kitchen island, and made a phone call, not to a civilian lawyer, but to my old friend Lieutenant Commander Davis at Navy Legal Assistance. "Alex, please tell me you didn't punch anyone," she laughed when she picked up. "Worse," I said, looking out the window at the orange sticker fluttering in the breeze. "I have an HOA president who just tried to find a federal vessel and threatened to tow it. Tell me about federal preemption." 2 hours later, my inbox was flooded with official documentation, specifically the statutes that explain how federal law supersedes, crushes, and obliterates local ordinances when they conflict. Its constitutional bedrock, the Supremacy Clause, basically a legal nuke that says the Navy outranks your beige pantsuit. So I printed it out, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction, thinking this would be the end of it. I was naive. Linda Sterling didn't care about the Constitution. She cared about compliance. And when I tried to show her the paperwork that afternoon, standing on my porch while she tried to hand me 3 more violations for noise pollution and aesthetic disruption, she literally waved the federal statutes away. "I don't care what your military friends say," she scoffed, standing on my welcome mat like she owned the mortgage. "This is a private community, Mr. Mercer, not a base. Federal law doesn't override our community standards." I was stunned into silence, not by her argument, but by the sheer, unadulterated delusion of it. She was actually standing there claiming that her HOA bylaws ranked higher than the United States government, and just to twist the knife, she pulled out a petition. 17 families have signed this, she declared, thrusting a sheet of paper at me, demanding the removal of dangerous military equipment from our peaceful streets. I glanced at the list and saw names from streets that didn't exist and scribbles that looked suspiciously like they were written by the same hand. But before I could call her out, Hank Miller wandered over, drawn by the commotion, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Linda, you asking me to sign a petition to ban my own brother-in-arms?" Hank rumbled, crossing his arms over his chest. "You realize this man just got back from defending your right to be a pain in the ass, right?" "This is different, Hank," she snapped, her face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Your RV doesn't scare the children. Military vehicles imply violence. They imply instability, and quite frankly, military people think they deserve special treatment, free healthcare, free housing, and now exemption from the rules. Some of us work for a living." The air on the porch dropped 20 degrees instantly. Elena Rodriguez had stepped out of her house across the street, sensing the legal disaster brewing like a storm front, and walked over just in time to hear Linda digging her own grave. "Linda," Elena said, her voice calm but laced with a professional warning, "discrimination against veteran status is a slippery slope, and you really should read the actual covenants before you start a war you can't pay for." "I have read them," Linda shouted, losing her composure. "I am the president. I am the law in Oakwood Haven. And if this boat isn't gone by Friday, I will seize it. I will lien your house, and I will make your life a living hell. Do you hear me?" She stormed off, heels clicking like gunfire, leaving us standing there in the afternoon sun, Hank shaking his head, Elena looking worried, and me realizing that this wasn't just a dispute anymore. This woman had just threatened to seize federal property and declared open war on a protected class of citizens. That evening, I received a certified letter from her, escalating the fine to a threat of foreclosure if the hazard wasn't removed, and I realized Linda wasn't just annoying, she was dangerous. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that she had just poked a sleeping bear, and the bear had the entire United States Code of Military Justice behind it. The war had begun, and Linda Sterling had no idea she was already surrounded. If Linda had just stopped at the fines, she might have survived with her dignity intact. But people like her, people who feed on the illusion of control, they don't know how to stop. They only know how to accelerate. And by Monday morning, she had slammed her foot on the gas and driven straight off a cliff. I woke up to the sight of a city code enforcement vehicle in my driveway, a tired-looking man named Inspector Wallace walking around my boat, shaking his head with the weary resignation of a man who hates his job. "You Commander Mercer?" he asked when I walked out. "I've got a report here from a Ms. Sterling claiming you're running an illegal scrapyard and storing hazardous industrial waste." I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the hull number and the clearly stenciled U.S. Navy on the side. Inspector Wallace let out a long, slow sigh, pulled out his phone, and I heard him say, "Ma'am, I'm at the property now. This is a federally registered military vessel. I can't ticket the Pentagon, ma'am." "No, I don't care what the bylaws say, goodbye." And just like that, her first wave of attack crumbled, but she was already launching the second. My insurance agent called me an hour later, sounding panicked, telling me that a concerned neighbor had reported that I was storing live munitions and explosives in a residential zone, threatening to cancel not just my policy, but the entire neighborhood's umbrella coverage if the armory wasn't removed. "It's a patrol boat, Dave," I said, rubbing my temples. "The most dangerous thing on board is a flare gun that expired during the Obama administration." We cleared it up, but the realization hit me cold and hard. Linda wasn't just hassling me. She was committing insurance fraud. She was making false reports. She was crossing lines that turn annoying neighbors into felons. And yet, she still wasn't done. She called an emergency community meeting that Wednesday at the Oakwood Haven Clubhouse, a glorified shed near the pool, and plastered the neighborhood with flyers featuring a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my boat with the headline, "Military Threat in Our Backyard." I walked in with Sophie by my side, Hank and Elena flanking us like bodyguards, and watched as Linda stood behind a podium she must have bought herself, preaching to a room of about 20 confused neighbors. "These people bring violence home with them," Linda was saying, her eyes wide and frantic. "PTSD, weapons training, aggression. Do we want our children exposed to that lifestyle? Do we want our property values plummeting because our neighborhood looks like a war zone?" A young couple, the Harrisons, stood up, looking disgusted. "He's a Navy commander, Linda, not a warlord. We feel safer with him here than with you stalking our driveways at midnight." "You don't understand," Linda shrieked, and that's when the mask really slipped, revealing the terrified, hateful creature underneath. "They don't belong here. They belong on bases where their instability can be contained." Elena Rodriguez was taking notes furiously, her legal mind categorizing every slanderous word, every discriminatory phrase, building a dossier that was growing thicker by the minute. But the nuclear option, the move that proved Linda Sterling had completely detached from reality, happened on Friday morning. I was in the garage with Sophie, showing her how to strip the varnish off the teak railing, when a black sedan pulled up, followed by a local police cruiser, and out stepped a woman in a windbreaker with those three letters that make everyone nervous: FBI. Special Agent Harper didn't look amused. She looked like someone who had been pulled away from investigating a bank robbery to deal with a circus. "Commander Mercer?" she asked, hand resting near her belt. "We received a tip about a potential domestic terror cell operating out of this address, specifically regarding the stockpiling of military-grade weaponry and the recruitment of radicals." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound just erupted out of me, a mix of disbelief and pure exhaustion. "Let me guess, Linda Sterling?" Agent Harper's expression softened just a fraction. "She claimed you were using the boat to transport illegal materials and were training a militia. I invited her in, showed her my service record, the boat's decommission papers, and the empty garage that contained nothing more radical than a table saw and a mini fridge." Agent Harper spent 20 minutes looking around, and then she sat down at my kitchen table, her demeanor shifting from investigator to ally. "Commander, filing a false report of terrorism to the FBI is a federal felony. Obstructing a federal investigation is a felony. Harassing a service member. Well, let's just say Ms. Sterling has had a very busy week." But then, the twist happened, the moment where the hunter became the prey. Elena knocked on the door, carrying a banker's box that looked heavy. "Agent Harper? I heard you were here. I'm Elena Rodriguez. I'm a forensic paralegal, and while you're looking into federal crimes, you might want to see what Linda has been doing with the Oakwood Haven finances." The room went silent. Elena opened the box and laid out 3 years of bank statements, fraudulent invoices, and shell company payments, pointing to a highlighted column. "She's been billing the association for security consulting from a company that lists her home address. She's been paying for her own landscaping, her car lease, and what looks like a kitchen renovation, all disguised as community maintenance. We're talking over $120,000. Agent Harper picked up a stack of invoices, her eyes scanning the numbers, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "This involves the U.S. mail. She mails the invoices to the management company," Elena nodded. "That's mail fraud," Harper said. "That's RICO territory. That's not just a bad neighbor. That's organized crime." Linda had tried to frame me to cover her tracks. She needed a villain to distract the neighborhood while she robbed them blind, and in her desperation, she had called the very people who had the power to destroy her. The trap was set, the evidence was ironclad, but Linda, in her infinite hubris, thought she was still winning. She thought the FBI was there to arrest me. The end came not with a whimper. but with the grand, cinematic explosion Linda had always craved, though the script had been flipped entirely. It started on a Tuesday night when my security cameras, installed specifically because of her, caught a figure sneaking across my driveway at 2 a.m., clutching a bottle of industrial paint stripper. The footage was high definition and undeniable. Linda Sterling, wearing a hoodie that did nothing to hide her face, pouring corrosive acid down the side of my boat, eating through the historic navy gray paint, and scarring the hull. She had escalated from paperwork to physical destruction of federal property, a felony enhancement that Agent Harper added to the file with a grim satisfaction, but we didn't arrest her yet. We waited for the Saturday morning association meeting, the grand stage she had set for her own victory lap. The community center was packed, standing room only, because Linda had promised a final resolution to the military problem, and the air in the room was electric, thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Linda marched to the front, flanked by a lawyer named Arthur Sterling. No relation, just expensive. Looking triumphant, completely unaware that Agent Harper was sitting in the back row wearing civilian clothes, or that Elena had distributed copies of the forensic financial report to every seat before the meeting started. Today, Linda announced, gripping the podium, "We take back our community from intimidation. I have contacted federal authorities, and I expect Mr. Mercer to be removed from this neighborhood shortly." I stood up slowly, the wood of the floor creaking under my boots. "You're right, Linda, federal authorities are here." She smirked, finally accepting defeat. "Commander?" "No," I said, pointing to the back of the room. "Agent Harper, if you would." Special Agent Harper stood up, her badge flashing in the overhead fluorescent lights, and the color drained from Linda's face so fast she looked like a ghost. "Linda Sterling," Harper's voice cut through the room like a knife. "I am placing you under arrest for embezzlement, mail fraud, filing false statements to a federal agent, destruction of government property, and civil rights violations under the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where Linda's reality collapsed in on itself. "You can't do this," Linda shrieked as two uniformed officers moved in. "I am the president. I am protecting these families from him." "You stole $127,000 from these families," Elena shouted, holding up the financial report. "You paid for your Lexus with our HOA dues." The room erupted. It wasn't just anger. It was the release of 3 years of pent-up frustration, a collective roar of a community realizing they had been held hostage by a criminal. They handcuffed her right there in front of the window overlooking the pool she claimed to protect, dragging her out past Hank Miller, who was slow clapping, a sound that was quickly joined by the entire room, a thunderous applause that followed her all the way to the cruiser. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Linda was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, plus 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution, which meant selling her house, the symbol of her status, to pay back the neighbors she had robbed. Her husband divorced her before the trial even started, leaving her with nothing but her debts and a criminal record that would follow her forever. But the real ending, the one that matters, happened 6 months later. Hank Miller was elected the new board president, and his first act was to abolish the restrictive bylaws Linda had worshipped. Elena and I, well, trauma bonding is a real thing, and fighting a federal case together turns out to be a hell of a foundation for a relationship. We're looking at combining households next spring. As for the boat, the USS Heritage sits proudly in my driveway, gleaming with a fresh coat of paint paid for by Linda's restitution check, a permanent monument to the fact that you can push a quiet man, you can push a neighborhood, but you never, ever push the United States Navy. But as I sit here on the stern, watching Sophie laugh with Elena's kids, I have to ask you, at what point does enforcing the rules become tyranny? We all have a Linda in our lives, someone who uses a little bit of power to make the world smaller, meaner, and darker, and maybe the real justice isn't just that she got caught, but that we finally stopped being afraid to stand up and say enough. What would you have done? Would you have moved? Or would you have fought the war right there on your front lawn? Let me know in the comments. And remember, sometimes the only way to get peace is to prepare for war.